Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War, a news update, third part thereof, but I know fifth part today, goodness me. If you're still with me, you guys are, you are gluttons for punishment, is all I can say. Right, we're going to go to the geopolitical news as it pertains to Ukraine, the Ukraine war, of course. We're going to start with the very big news from yesterday that Turkish Parliament has approved Sweden's accession to NATO. 287 Parliament members voted in favour, 55 against and 4 abstained. Signature of Turkish President Erdogan completes the ratification. This leaves Hungary as the last NATO member to approve. Another reward goes to Putin as the employee of the month in contributing to NATO's enlargement. Then we heard, will Hungary follow suit? They won't be able to hide behind Turkey anymore. We heard that, and actually this was that was yesterday. Sweden has declined. No. Then what happened was Hungary offered Sweden to come over to Hungary to talk about this. So Sweden has declined Hungary's request for negotiations regarding its NATO membership bid. Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström turned down Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's proposal for discussions. The development occurs as Turkey nears ratification of Sweden's entry into NATO, leaving Hungary the remaining NATO member yet to approve Sweden's application. Contrast between Orban's offer of dialogue and his public criticism of Sweden underscores the intricate relations between the two countries. Right. I was thinking at this time that, oh my goodness, Hungary are going to be difficult. And isn't it interesting that Sweden has denied going to Hungary? Then I started thinking, if they denied the offer, if they turned down the offer, then does that mean that they are that confident that Hungary would allow Sweden into NATO? Is there something going on behind the scenes that I'm not aware about? Anyway, Viktor Orban today has said, just finished a phone call with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. I reaffirmed that Hungarian government supports the NATO membership of Sweden. I also stressed that we will continue to urge the Hungarian National Assembly to vote in favour of Sweden's accession and conclude the ratification at the first possible opportunity. Wow. Okay. So I think that some things have happened behind the scenes whereby Viktor Orban has been told in no uncertain terms that Sweden needs to be able to join NATO and that Hungary must ratify them. I think there's been some arm twisting because this is very much a case of Viktor Orban acquiescing to kind of the desires of the West and of NATO rather than Putin and Russia. So, yeah, very interesting. And then on the back of that, and I've already mentioned this, I mentioned this in the military aid segment because it pertains to the EU's 50 billion euro package. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has arrived in Uzhhorod for talks with Ukrainian Prime Minister Shmyhal. Before his visit, Fico attracted a lot of criticism and discussions due to a number of pro-Russian statements. And he is saying basically, life in Kiev is fine. You wouldn't know there's a war on. And even though I showed a picture of a missile dropping in a courtyard in Kiev this morning. And he is saying that basically Ukraine need to compromise and give up territory to Russia. Then he's gone to Ukraine, and now Slovakia will support the allocation of 50 billion euros to Ukraine from the EU. Shmyhal has said on the results of the meeting with Fico. According to him, Fico also confirmed full support for Ukraine's European integration efforts and assured that Slovakia would not block Ukraine's purchase of weapons and equipment from Slovak businesses. The two countries also agreed to cooperate in the supply of equipment for the construction of defence lines. So, wow. Now we've got Robert Fico saying, okay, well, Hungary's not standing in the way of NATO and EU accession, NATO accession. And we now are not going to stand in the way of financial military assistance to Ukraine. And in fact, I'd already reported, our military industrial complex will support that. We'll happily sell weapons to Ukraine and we'll assist in the construction of defensive lines. This is a real about face from both of these leaders that I think signifies really positive moves. I mean, this is great. This is, in effect, a rebuke of Putin and Russia, it seems, from erstwhile allies of Putin and Russia. So I think there's a lot of good news to come out of today. I think there are some pieces of good news to come out from the military aid segment that I shared with you this morning. So I think overall we've got, some things to be happy about with regard to the position of Ukraine in this war going forward. Right, now let's look at a number of other situations. The head of General Staff for Norway has called on them to prepare for a possible war with Russia. Chief of the General Staff of the Norwegian Armed Forces, Erik Kristoffersen, has said that the country's military has a window of opportunity that could last 1, 2, maybe 3 years, during which defence spending should be increased. Quote, but we're running out of time. I just want to emphasise this. We don't know what will happen to Russia in 3 years. It is important for us to face the uncertain and unpredictable world with strong national defence. He stressed that Russia is building up its military potential much faster than expected. There are alarm bells ringing in a number of countries around the world, given what is taking place in, obviously, Ukraine and Russia, but you can also look at Taiwan and with China. Interesting that China are in a bit of financial problem at the moment. That could have some effect on support for Ukraine. We shall see. A nationwide protest by farmers today begins in Poland, demanding protection of their businesses from imports from third countries. Protesters plan to take the roads of cities and villages with their equipment in more than 150 places across the country in demand to stop, quote, the uncontrolled import of agricultural products from other countries, including Ukraine, that do not adhere to European standards. Now, I'm involved in continued arguments with one of my viewers and supporters of the channel with regard to Donald Tusk and Poland. Poland's in a very difficult position, or at least the Polish politicians are in a difficult position with regard to the legacy of the previous government and wanting to turn things around politically speaking as far as they're concerned, whilst also wanting to support Ukraine really strongly, whilst also at the same time wanting to support their farmers who have some genuine issues and truckers with how Ukraine has been able to take advantage of EU benefits and EU regulation without being a part of the EU. So these are very difficult things to contend with. Now, this will be from someone from one political point of view. I did point out a TLDR News EU video to just get our heads around what's going on with Poland and the transfer of power from the PIS to the new coalition. And I had said that the new coalition is very much pro-EU and they're trying to undo some of the things from the previous government. Wolf Spirit Alpha Sigma here says, Jonathan, obviously a Polish person, regarding the situation in Poland, it's an absolute horror show lately. We are like a banana republic trying to recover from lawlessness. We have a traitor for president, so the president is different from the prime minister. The prime minister is Donald Tusk and is of the new coalition. The president is Duda and he is of the PIS party and has been doing things to try and work against the coalition ruling administration. So he says, we have a number of illegal institutions that do all they can to enforce the PIS regime. So the previous Law and Justice Party was very right-wing populists. If not for Tusk, we would be worse than Hungary. In fact, we were worse than Hungary for the last 8 years, which went mostly under the radar abroad. Wish us luck, because if we mend our country, we will be able to help Ukraine with all we've got. I believe that can all happen soon. So I know that there's one person that is arguing to toss that Donald Tusk is terrible and the PIS were seemingly fine in many respects, and etc., etc., etc. Well, actually, here's someone from Poland. The person I'm arguing is from New Zealand, from Poland, saying, do you know what? It was absolutely terrible for 8 years, and we need to get democracy back on track. And hopefully, once we've done that, then we can start supporting Ukraine more tangibly. Right, then moving to the US, I've given a separate video to what my thoughts about the US the New Hampshire elections, well, not elections, New Hampshire primaries that took place last night. Phillips O'Brien says, by the way, Trump knows it was not a great night for him and the attacks against his mental state hurt. He openly is threatening to investigate Haley if she doesn't drop out. This is not a sign of someone who is happy with the result. I said, just this will pertain to Ukraine. I said that his reaction wasn't professional, really. I think he's not a magnanimous person. He finds it really hard to say nice things to other people. He sees the whole world as transactional, as a zero-sum game. So Nikki Haley, if she does well, or if he's nice to her, it somehow takes away from him. It's that zero-sum game. So he cannot give her anything because he just can't. It's not in his DNA. So he will win that primary, but with that, he will also just trash Nikki Haley. That's just how he works. And I was talking about if you want to attract the center ground, if you need those moderate Republicans on your side in order to beat Biden, if you're playing the long game, you need to probably change your rhetoric a little bit here, and you need to try and attract the swing voters in the center. Because the more you shift to the right, you might get your MAGA supporters frothing at the mouth saying how wonderful you are, and he will bathe in that adulation. He will love that. He will go to rallies where people are mental, who will be absolutely going crazy for him, and he might get a false sense of security from that. But the reality is, if he wants to win the presidential election, he has to win center voters. It's just the way it is. He is not going to win on going hard right. Right? He just won't. So, I'm not saying this from a liberal lefty point of view. I'm just saying this from like how to do politics and how to win elections, especially in a two-party system. So, you will always get the Republicans that are on the far right voting for you. So if you move to the center, you can attract the center independents and the moderate Republicans and the never Trumpers. You might actually become Trumpers if you move to the center, adopt that position, knowing that the far right will always vote Republican. They're never going to go Democrat. But if you shift more to the right, then you are alienating those independents and centrist voters who will then listen to some of the Democrat rhetoric about abortion and, trying to demonize Trump and that MAGA Republicanism, and they will either vote independent or side with Biden holding their nose. So this is obviously that's how Trump can win that election. He needs to go to the center, but. So what you've got is Nikki Haley staying in the race at the moment as long as the funders will back her, and I think that is useful actually for a number of interesting reasons. But this is something that commentator EDH said. There are many reasons why Nikki Haley should continue. So Nikki Haley is very pro-Ukrainian, formerly working the UN. Although she's trying to couch it in giving equipment, not money, but I think she's generally in the right place for much of what she says about Ukraine, and she has a serving husband as well, who's presently serving right now, not obviously anywhere near Ukraine. So EDH says there are many reasons that Haley should continue. So 11 points behind. Is there any point in her continuing? She's not going to win. 1, delegates in some states are proportional. 2, Supreme Court should rule Trump out. 3, if Trump is found guilty in a criminal case, his support would tank. And there is actually statistical evidence of that. There are a number of Republicans who have said if he is found guilty, then they won't continue to support him. So that is a challenge for Trump. Haley wants to force Trump into debate where she would likely win. 5, with increased court time, Trump's senior moments may increase. 6, Trump supporters like that he is a strong leader. Haley needs to be as strong and not just give up. Interesting. 7, Haley's digs at Trump have more weight than if Biden said the same. Interesting. 8, Haley up to now has been soft on Trump. I expect criticism to increase. Yes, so I think she's left it to Chris Christie to do the direct Trump criticisms. Be interesting to see where she goes now. 9, if Trump wants Haley to quit, this is a good reason to continue. So Trump has come out saying he wants her to quit. 10, Haley is more likely to beat Biden, although if Trump is not the representative, Biden may make way for Kamala Harris. This is very interesting. So I think Nikki Haley probably, if she did amazingly win the race, and maybe Trump got in trouble with the law, was unable to carry on, or whatever. Nikki Haley, I think, would have more chance of beating Biden than Trump. But for the reason I just gave you, if she adopts a centre ground, she's got those on the right. They may be totally pro-Trump, but if Trump's not running, they'll go, well, okay, it's all in with Haley then. The added thing that I think Haley would get, people would Republicans who would quite like the Republican Party to be the party to have the first female president. I think they would absolutely lord that over the Democrats. So I think that could be quite useful. And I think Biden apparently is only running if Trump runs. There's no other option that he sees would beat Trump. But if Nikki Haley then was running, I think that's probably quite right. You could see Biden then drop out, so Kamala Harris would go in, and she would be the potential for the first female president. So that would then try and stop the Republicans getting that. So interesting. And the 11th point is the Democrats are not yet to do any serious advertising. Now, that's all giving you the context of, whether Haley will stay in or not. Now, Haley is a strong proponent of Ukraine. Trump generally isn't. I know there are some big Trump supporters who recognize that Ukraine's important, who are trying to argue that he would be actually brilliant on Ukraine and Putin would be too afraid or something and the war would stop, and they believe his kind of 24-hour claim. I don't think that's at all the case. But personally, from just thinking about Ukraine and nothing else, and I understand this is completely narrow, but for just on Ukraine, Nikki Haley is definitely the better proposition than Trump. It's just no two ways about it. Trump has given too much credit to what he calls strong men. He loves his Viktor Orbáns, his Kim Jong-un, and his love letters from him. He's given kudos to Putin over his own intelligence services and Xi Jinping as well. So, he and Jair Bolsonaro, he loves other autocrats. And he is moving towards autocracy himself. So I think it's going to be a fascinating race to watch. Right? I know you guys see me as really strongly partisan, favouring the Democrats, but just from an independent point of view, from an internationalist point of view, this is going to be interesting, and it is in no way in the bag for Trump in terms of if he does get the GOP candidacy, then I think he will be up against it due to all the issues of the 2020 election just resurfacing again this time round, and the form based on abortion legislation and the court ruling being overturned of Roe versus Wade. So I think it's going to be fascinating. It won't be that easy for him. It won't be easy for Biden. It'll be a tough gig for both of them, and they're both old as well. Belarus apparently looking like it was not notified of it's been notified, of default. So RBC are claiming that owners of Belarusian government bonds are sent a notice of default to Minsk. Things are not looking good for the Belarusian economy there. And German aid to Ukraine talks about Ukrainian Deputy Minister of Defense Stanislav Haida has met with a German delegation today. He expressed his gratitude for the German military assistance and spoke out about the ministry's activities. The priorities include institutional changes, anti-corruption measures, and building transparent procurement mechanisms, digitalization, and debureaucratization. Wow. So trying to get rid of bureaucracy there. The Ukrainian side mentioned their need for air defense equipment, including missiles for air defense systems. Another priority is to develop an agreement on security guarantees that Germany can provide to Ukraine before it becomes a NATO member. This is very similar to what the UK has done, and that UK agreement is seen as a bit of a blueprint for other nations and agreements going forward with Ukraine. I've already talked about that. Don't know why that's there. So we then have just one more thing about the US. Actually, this is in the wrong place. Sorry. Why does aid to Ukraine hang in the balance? Because House Republicans are opposing it at the behest of Donald Trump, who favors its authoritarian ally Russia over Ukraine, the United States, and the rest of the free world in this conflict, says John Harwood here, who's a journalist and public speaker. He's formerly of Wall Street Journal, NYT, CNN, etc., etc. Now, this is the news that Associated Press reporting that senators are racing to win support for a border deal as aid to Ukraine hangs in the balance. Now, I refer you back to, I won't go over the same ground again, but I refer you back to my military aid video, the one before this, because there's a whole thing on excess defense equipment, EDA, this kind of excess defense authority that potentially allows Biden to give or sell very cheaply military aid to Ukraine without going through Congress. Now, it could be that he's going to go down that route and say to Mike Johnson, do a deal on the border now, or don't do it at all, and we just do the EDA. So watch out for all of this movement that might take place in Congress going forward. If it remains an impasse, you could see this EDA situation appear. But go and watch my previous video for more details on that. And then, in the US, Russia and Iran have met. It's quite fascinating, this. Here's a video of Sergei Lavrov meeting with the Iranians, where? At the UN, of course, but in the US. Russia and Iran, two sworn enemies of the US, meeting in the US, deciding how to further attack the US, says Jay and Q. I mean, goodness me. But that's the nature of the beast. When you agree to have the UN in New York, you're going to have meetings like this. Okay. Finally, moving on to sort of sanctions and economic affairs. Senator source tells Politico that the White House National Security Council backs Senator Risch, he's a Republican from Idaho, his Repo Act as is, without Senator Cardin's, that's the Democrats' counterproductive amendment. This is Colby Badwire, who's himself a conservative from Canada, so he'll probably be in favor of the Republicans here. So Senate aide says NSCA sides with the GOP on repo. Okay, what's all this about? A Senate aide said that the White House supports Senator Jim Risch's bipartisan bill to send seized Russian assets to Ukraine, even without the amendments Democrats will propose. The staffer, who was not authorized to speak publicly on as a matter of practice, told NatSec Daily the NSC has said that they fully support the language that Risch has before the committee, and they don't see a need for further amendments in the process. That poses a challenge to Senator Ben Cardin, who's a Democrat, chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who proposed an amendment to the so-called repo bill that would require all G7 nations to sign off before transferring the seized funds. In other words, the Democrat, what this is about taking seized Russian assets and turning that into assistance for Ukraine. But the Democrat there, at least as far as I understand it, don't know the details, wants that to be an agreement through all the G7 countries, so it's not just the US being on their own here. Risch's bill waives a judicial review and wouldn't mandate input from allies. If the aid is correct, that would mean the White House would be siding with the top Republican on the SFRC and not the panel's leading Democrat, which I think could talk to how much the Democrats, or the senior Democrats, or the administration, want aid to get to Ukraine as quickly as possible. Let's side with this and let's get those assets, those frozen assets, given over to Ukraine in some way. Now, on the other side of the coin, here we have the EU is unlikely to confiscate Russian central bank assets. This might only be one area of the frozen assets, the central bank assets from Russia. European officials believe it's unlikely the EU will seize Russian central bank assets, partly due to the legal risks, Reuters reported yesterday. And I've talked about this previously, that actually why the UK is so reticent. And I know there's two people have now called me up on using the term reticent. Go and look at whether you can use reticent as reluctant. And it's a bit more of a British thing, but in the Merriam-Webster, which is an American dictionary, it details how that is actually doable and has been done for a very long time. So when I say they are reticent to do that, I am using acceptable grammar or language. Nonetheless, the UK have been reticent to get behind taking frozen assets and turning into liquid cash somehow and getting that cash to Ukraine, aiding Ukraine with the frozen assets, because of all the legal implications that might come about So they've been a bit more conservative. UK has. EU have been looking to do what America are much more up for doing, but the EU they're saying, well, certainly with the Russian central bank assets, we're not too confident with that. Well, it turns out, and I need to look into this, but I talked about Belgium giving Ukraine 600 million euros in military assistance. This next is saying that this is a profit from Russian assets that were frozen in the country. There are a lot of frozen assets in Belgium. Oddly enough, I think Belgium is one of the largest sources of that. Interesting comments from Sophie, who's a Belgian, on one of my threads yesterday, which I think I'll read to you in an extra. But yeah, interesting if the aid they are giving is from frozen assets. Right, then moving on. Politico is saying that the EU may sanction Russian aluminium or aluminum. You're so wrong, Americans. Actually, technically, I think you're right on that one. But I was looking into the etymology of aluminium compared to aluminum. And actually, the Americans might have more justification. Oh, that hurts. That really hurts. Anyway, EU may sanction Russian aluminium as part of the next package. This is really important because they are a big exporter of aluminium, and the reason it hasn't been sanctioned is obviously because the EU need it. It's a bit like energy and sanctioning of Atomic Energy Agency Rosatom. They haven't done that because simply put, the EU needs that support, needs the export of those key materials from Russia in that sector. So basically, and most countries appear to do this, which is you sanction the stuff that you can easily sanction. You do that first and you keep ramping up and okay, we'll sanction this, and you get through, the more this thing goes on, the more likely it is that nations and organizations will sanction the stuff that they really don't want to sanction, that is painful for them to sanction. But you get to a point where we've got to do this because actually it's more important that Russia gets hit than we get hit. Now, that will obviously mean that the EU will have to find other sources of vast amounts of aluminium, no doubt. Now, Poland and the Baltic states are proposing to ban LNG imports from Russia. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You get to a point where, liquefied natural gas, we think we can get that from elsewhere, the US being a prime suspect there. We think we can get it elsewhere and not take a major hit. So now we're ready to do that. We will ban LNG. A ban on imports of liquefied natural gas and aluminium from Russia is proposed to be included in the 13th package of sanctions being discussed in the EU. In addition, Poland and the Baltic states propose to ban scientific cooperation and funding of joint scientific research. Other proposals by the four countries include further measures to combat Russia's circumvention of sanctions, tougher restrictions in the aviation sector, and an expansion of the list of banned products used in the production of drones. That's according to Deutsche Welle, the German national broadcaster media outlet. Right. The two biggest exporters to Kyrgyzstan since Russia invaded Ukraine are Germany in black and Poland in blue. There is no sign whatsoever that those exports, which are surely going to Russia, are slowing. What is the EU doing? This is a very difficult job of trying to close the loopholes and stopping goods from getting to Russia through the back door. It's just really difficult. And this is not to blame. Well, at least I wouldn't be blaming Germans and the Polish here in the same way they haven't blamed any country that's been. All the countries, basically, if you look at all the components in the missiles, it's like British, American, blah, 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 blah. Every nation that is supporting Ukraine also has their components and also just general goods being exported to Russia. These are sanctioned goods that are getting to Russia via places like Kyrgyzstan. It's because you sell them genuinely, legally, to someone who sells it to someone else. 5 exchanges later, it's ended up in Kyrgyzstan, and some Kyrgyzstanis going, yeah, let's get that across the border to Russia and make some money out of that. So somehow those loopholes need to be closed. Right, no report says a Dutch investigation service, FIOD, has arrested 3 Dutch people in an international police operation. The trio is suspected of violating sanctions against Russia by being part of an international smuggling network. good to see that that is being acted upon, that these, again, loopholes or not necessarily a loophole, but just a flagrant abuse of the sanctions, that kind of activity is being smoked out and dealt with. And the Bank of Cyprus has left Russia. So Cyprus is a country where there's a lot of Russian money. Okay, it's a kind of a big laundromat for a bit like London, or Londonigrad, as they say. Cyprus is similar. It's heavily involved in cargo in the same way that Greece is, and ghost ships and whatnot, but also a lot of sort of Russian money is sitting in Cypriot banks. Well, here, Bank of Cyprus is now leaving Russia. It's closed its representative offices in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and the data posted by the Central Bank of Russia has revealed. So that's come out. Anyway, that's enough from me for this geopolitical segment. It's a lot of content. I need a rest. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Whew.